This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 234 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid-state, turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I have Monique Maley, and she is a CEO, serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and in 2011, she founded Articulate Persuasion. She's also the author of a book that I've got in front of me called Turbulence. Monique, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be here.
So before we get started on anything else, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today and what do you do today, just to lay some context for the conversation that we're going to have.
Okay, well, I'll try and do an edited version, but I think like most people, it seems like a circuitous route to where I am today, but actually the through line makes total sense. I actually started professionally as an actor, and I trained classically in the UK, but I worked professionally in the industry for 15 years. And a lot of that is the foundation and the toolkit of what I do now for a variety of reasons. And then I founded a theater company when I was 24. And I did not realize at the time, because the term was not as prominent as it is now, that was very entrepreneurial of me. Turns out I am entrepreneurial. And so having worked in larger organizations, I was always a little challenged with I was always trying to make systems better, make processes better, make the organization better. And for me, it was always hard when you have too many decision makers that want to feel like they've got their fingers in the pie. So I realized at one point that I needed to go back to starting my own thing. And so I've started a couple of businesses. And as you mentioned, this one, Articulate Persuasion, I started in 2011. And actually, the interesting thing was it's kind of a version of something that I started back when I was an actor. Once shows were up and I had my days free, I couldn't just sit around. So I started coaching lawyers on jury trial. So they would bring me in to work with younger associates on driving a narrative, creating a narrative, telling a story. They ended up bringing me to do witness prep for trials and body language and all that sort of thing. I thought I was when I started this business, I thought I'd go back and do that, but now nothing goes to the jury anymore. Everything's settled out of court. So what I got to do instead, I was living in Austin when I started it, which is a very tech-heavy town, as you well know. And what I found is those same skills were so needed in rapidly growing companies, and especially companies that were very engineering heavy, because the language that engineers speak and the language that business people speak are not always on the same planet. And so helping both communicate more effectively together became the foundations for Articulate Persuasion.
Awesome. And that's definitely a skill that the listeners and myself will probably need. And communication is kind of one of those things. It's been a few years ago, but I did a whole talk that I used to give about communication for geeks and teaching, people like me how to cut the acronyms out and talk a little bit more natural and normal and learn business concepts, because that's really the important part of the stuff that we do is drive ROI. How can we improve, efficiency and optimization? You were talking about that as kind of one of the things that you kind of wanted to do every time you had a business. You wanted to improve it and optimize it and find processes and that worked. And that's one of the areas that we do really well in tech for the most part, is to optimize things. But we don't do a very good job of communicating that.
Well, and getting the buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes optimizing requires more people or just more funds. And if you can articulate that in a way that gets your CFO to buy in to the need or to the direction or to the why, even if it's that something's delayed, sometimes the sales team makes promises that the dev team can't deliver. If the two of them can understand the why of each other and can get buy-in on that, it's going to be a win for everybody. And so I think that's the bigger thing. And in my experience, the biggest challenge around engineers is that what makes them brilliant is they're so good at seeing the detail, right? I always say that they're great at seeing the black grain of sand in a sea of white.
Mm-hmm.
But when you try and talk to someone and get buy-in from somebody or story tell to someone, if you try and get into that much nitty-gritty detail, you're going to lose them.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
It's often the editing process that's the harder lift.
Yeah. There's a quote in your book early on that says, like, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taking place. And, I kind of fall back on that a lot with technology. I'll be talking to somebody on my team and I'll say, well, did you let them know? Oh, yeah. We talked about it. And then I'll go talk to the other person. That's like, I don't recall this conversation happening. And is that like a frequent thing, especially when it comes to engineers and technology?
Well, I think that's not
Or is that everywhere?
To engineers, that is everybody. And especially I think very much because of technology. I sent the email, I left a message, it's on Slack, as if I did my part and then I'm done. Right. The whole first chapter, which is about conversations, is that a conversation is always a dialogue. It's never a monologue. So sending the email is just one part of the conversation, making sure that the person on the other side not only received it, but read it, understood it, digested it, has all their questions answered. And I really think if I'm sending you an email, that is my responsibility to make sure that you engage on the other side of the dialogue. Because ultimately, you responding in some way is important for me to be able to do my job well. So that's my biggest challenge with so many tech tools that are out there. Yes, Slack is awesome for some things, but it's often a depository for, I send it out and it's there and now it's off my plate.
Yeah.
If the other person doesn't get it, then it's not off your plate.
Yep. I agree 100%. People can do that and just say, well, it was sent to you on this date and time. Yeah. But, I asked you the question, via email and you replied via Slack, and now I'm totally confused.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other, there's even a picture in the book in one section where it really talks about sort of like the spaghetti bowl of highways. If you're on one highway and I'm on another, it really doesn't, if I send you an email and you send me a Slack, or if I leave a voicemail and you send me an email, it doesn't really matter because we're not on the same road. We're going to miss each other. And then we lose time, like decision making gets slowed, deadlines get lost. We piss clients off. I mean, those things happen just because we're not on the same highway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, when let's say we start figuring out that communication is probably one of our biggest problems when it comes to getting things going with our business. What are some things that we can do to kind of clarify that? Because I know you have a whole section on just clarity and moving things forward. What are some tips for like a leader just to be more clear and to focus things down? I know you talk about simplifying things. What are some ways we can do that?
So that's as I put a whole chapter in for the very reason that it's so important. And I think it kind of goes back to the title of the book. The book is called Turbulence, not because, it's coming out after a crazy year, but because we as leaders often either cause turbulence or don't notice the turbulence that we're creating in our own companies. And one of these really is this lack of clarity. And the first problem is that sometimes we aren't making it clear to other people because it's actually not clear to us. And it's really not fair to set an expectation of somebody else or even a deadline if we don't understand the real reason why or having a vision. There's a whole section about vision. When you're leading a team, or even if you founded a company and you don't have a really clear vision, like your employees are like, where are we going? And if you don't know, you can't get them there and they can't trust you to follow. So the key in clarity is really forcing yourself to take the time, because we often just blow through it. I'll get to that later, right? Like, oh, it's clear enough for now. Don't worry about it. Let's get this done, and then we'll figure that out. And we keep doing that and kicking the can down the road, and we never actually clarify. And I find that one of the simplest things you can do to really clarify things is to start saying stuff out loud, because it is always clearer to us in our heads than it is when we have it come out of our mouth and we hear it back, repeated back to us. And the other thing is, if somebody asks you a question and it takes you 17 sentences to answer it, it's not clear to you. I really miss when Twitter had 140 characters, because I love to just do that exercise with people. If you can say it in 140 characters, it's going to be really clear. It's going to take you longer to write it, which is probably why they changed it, because nobody wanted to spend that kind of time. But it does force you to really make sure that you're choosing words that are powerful, but making sure that what is in your mind is very clear.
Yeah. So when I think about like clarity, and like you said, Twitter being 140 characters, that's one of the rules that I have on my team, that your emails have to be 4 sentences or less, because if it's past 4 sentences, I'm probably going to not read it, or I'll get to the 4th sentence and my eyes will be so glazed over. I can't focus. So spend a little bit more time and shorten it up. And that's what a lot of people are like, why do you mean spend more time to make it shorter? Because in school, we always thought, you had to write 10 pages. It's going to take forever. But sometimes it's harder to write one really good page than 10 garbage pages.
There are a million quotes back as far as Cicero to Mark Twain, which is the quote that I use, which is, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter.
Yes.
And that is the thing. And that's why it goes by the wayside, because it does take more time. And yet, if we put the time up front, we save so much time later that it's unbelievable. And the minute you start actively taking the time up front to clarify it for people, to edit it for people, how much easier your life gets on the other end, it just goes way up.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's one of the things that we as engineers kind of struggle with sometimes, because we feel like the details are all important. Everything's important. So I have to put it all in there. And it's hard to realize, like, from a business perspective, what is the most important. And for me, that comes into having empathy for the person's position and where they're at, trying to put a lens over your eyes and saying, well, this may be important to me. I care about what, VM hardware they're running on, or whatever, what cloud provider we're using. But from a sales perspective, we don't care about that. We just care that it's up 99.9% of the time. Right. So how can I put that lens on things? And how do you teach people to think from other people's perspective to get the right important information in that?
Well, I think that, you did my job for me, because you said exactly what it was. I always say, the first thing that has to happen is it has to start with them. Who are you talking to? Because what's important to me is not what's important to them. What motivates them is not what motivates me. What drives my business, my part of the business, may not be what drives their part of the business. So the first thing you have to do is, who am I talking to, and how is this relevant to them? Because they don't need to know everything that I know. And quite honestly, if I sat here on this podcast and tried to tell your audience everything that I know, first of all, the podcast would be really, really, really long. Nobody would listen to it. And it's too much information. At some point, everybody tunes out, right? What you want is, what's something that's important to me that I can go back and make a great business decision, or align my team around, or whatever. So the first thing I think of is, who am I talking to? Ask yourself that. And, what are their motivators, drivers, whatever. And then, how does what I know matter to them? So it's not what I want to say. It is, what do they need to know? And all you need to share with them is whatever they need to know. Now, you can put a lot of stuff in attachments, backup slides, whatever, but keep it clean in the front end, and they may come back and ask you follow-up questions. But if you give them too much information up front, they're going to tune out, and ultimately you won't get what you need.
Yep, 100%. I know when I first started doing like budget presentations and became, more in that management leadership role, I wanted to put everything in the budget. Like, I remember even just like upgrading PCs for people, I put everybody's name that needed a PC. What's the purpose of that? The CEO just glazes over all that. So what you got to do is just say, how about just like 130 laptops, 25 Macs, boom, you're done. Don't worry about it.
And then take it one step further and say, we need 25 new laptops
Mhm.
to help us get to XYZ outcome,
Yeah.
right? Because ultimately that's what matters to them. You're sitting to the CFO and you're telling them you want to spend, 20 grand, 50 grand on technology. They're not going to say no if you can show a great business outcome to them.
Yep. Exactly.
And why the CEO thinks that that's a great idea and the CFO thinks that's a great idea are two different reasons. So make sure you understand them first so you can get them to buy in.
So one of the things, going back to this budget talk, is that you need to go in there if you're going to ask for something like this to have confidence. And you talk a little bit about authentic confidence. Well, what is that?
Authentic confidence is, so what I lay out in the book is that my belief is that confidence is two-sided. There's internal and there's external. One is the confidence that we have in ourselves, that is our mindset or our beliefs. And the external is how people view us, or our executive presence, for lack of a better term. So one thing is to really believe that you know what you're talking about. And the other one is other people feeling that they can trust you, have confidence in you. And we often undermine that. We may know what we're talking about, but we show up in a way which may not show that. For example, one of the common things that I have with engineers and scientists, because they give so much information or data, it makes it sound, if they give so much information, it makes them sound like they don't know answers to something because they can't be concise about it. There really is an equation between how concisely you can answer something and how confident that makes you sound in what you're talking about. But then there's the other side of the equation. What happens when actually our inner confidence, there's a million things like imposter syndrome type things, which is, I'm really not sure. And then that starts to come across in the words that we use. We might sound a little tentative or apologetic, or we try to justify something. And all of that really gets into the middle of this confidence equation. And it's important to have both, I believe, in order to be what I call have authentic confidence, not feigned. Like I'm putting it on. What is it? The fake it till you make it thing.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that one. I don't believe that works. But I think the easier hurdle is when the external isn't really aligned. I think the harder thing is if you really don't believe in yourself or in your value or in your knowledge set, that's when it becomes harder. And sometimes that's just about information gathering. That's just about doing some homework.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And when I think back, like whenever I do go to this budget stuff, I still do that research to find out the name of every person that's going to be getting a new computer. And I put it in a spreadsheet, and I even print out that spreadsheet and bring it with me, but I bring it in a different notebook. I don't present it. But if the question's ever asked, well, who is this person? I can pull it out and I can show it, and I've got it. It gives me confidence to know that my numbers are accurate because I've done the work, but I'm not going to present all that garbage,
Completely. But it's not garbage because it's important
Right.
to you, right? But it's not important for you to share it with them. There's two different things. What's
Mhm.
important to you and what's important to share are two different things. And I totally agree. Whatever it is that gives you the belief mindset that I am totally ready for this, or I'm ready for this job, I'm ready for this conversation, I'm ready for this presentation, whatever it takes for you to get there, it's going to be different for you and for me, and it'll be a completely different process.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really want to say about confidence, because I think this is so important and it's so often an easy barometer, both one we can ask ourselves, but it's something that when other people ask it of us, it is very telling, is that I say that only confident people say, I don't know. The people who are asked a question and they kind of answer and answer and answer in the hope that somewhere in the middle of all that, the other person is going to get something meaningful is a fast way to undermine yourself and your credibility. However, if you don't know, that's okay. The thing I always say is just don't say, I don't know, period. Say, I don't know, comma. I don't know, but let me find out for you. I don't know. That's a great question. Let's dig into that. Or I don't know, but we're actually doing some research on that right now. Whatever that may be, just I don't know, comma is a very, very easy way to start not only owning the confidence and the belief that you have in yourself, but also projecting that out for people.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. I learned that. So I teach part-time at Winthrop University, and I have for, I guess, 13 years now. And that's one thing I learned is if a student asks you something you don't know, don't just go on and go on and on about it. Just say, I don't know. Why don't you look it up and let me know?
Exactly. Whatever the response is, right? I don't know, comma. I
Yeah.
don't know. Look that up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. That's a great question. Report it back to the class. I would love to know.
So just make sure that you feel comfortable before you go into that budget meeting or before you go into the sales meeting or even a whatever. If you're leading a team, you got to be okay with saying, I don't know. And if not, get yourself there. Figure out the process that it takes to get yourself there.
Yeah. So another thing you talk about that I guess probably comes from your actor background is storytelling and being a good storyteller. And I love to use, analogies and stories to kind of convey a point. I've learned over the years that if I just tell the technology facts to people, it makes sense to me, but it probably doesn't trigger any emotions or do anything for anybody else. But a good story will do that. What are some tips that we can have for telling the right story so that it makes sense and we're not telling like the worst thing I could do is to go into our CFO's office and tell a story about Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. That totally doesn't hit with him. How do you know what kind of story to tell?
You just went back to that first, what we were talking about before,
Yeah.
which is really understanding who you're telling a story to. And I think that's essential because the example I give is like, you may go to Vegas, right? And have a great trip. But the story of your trip to Vegas that you tell your mother is not the same as the story you tell your best friend. Same trip, right? Same event, totally different story.
Yep.
And so I think you have to understand not just who you're talking to, but what I really focus on in storytelling is there's different models for storytelling. There's some great different ways of getting there. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is what's the moral of your story? At the end of any speech, any conversation, anything that you do, any story you tell, you want to make sure that whoever is listening takes away one thing. If you get them to remember one thing, you have knocked it out of the park. We often try and put so much information in. We try and get them to think, well, the one thing I want is X, Y, Z, A, B, C, right? You can't. If you do a great job, it's one thing. What do you want them to do, know, believe by the time you're done? And that has to be the starting place because that's the way you edit everything else out, right? I need them to understand that I want them to walk out of the room saying, if we make this investment in laptops, we're going to speed up our product development. And anything that you say in your storytelling, anything you say in your presentation or whatever it is, that doesn't directly lead them down the path to that one thing, you don't have to tell them. But so many times people don't know where they're taking people when they tell a story. But there's a reason why fairy tales have a moral. They were the way that we have of unpacking or packing up information, right? And being able to share it with other people and remember it easily.
So what do you say to people that, because I've worked with people and maybe I've been this person before too, where instead of like, there's one reason, there's gotta be like 10, let's have 10 things in there. And, there's 10 morals to the story. We need to show them all 10. What do you say to those people?
So usually even of those 10 things, there's one bigger reason why those 10 things are important and be able to highlight that. But if not, do they need 10 reasons to say yes?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, do you need to give them 10 reasons? Why don't you just pick the most compelling reason? And then if they ask more questions, you can maybe give more information if it's needed. But what happens if we give them 10 reasons? So it's a perfect example. I had a client years ago, had a really young, as a tech company, selling software, had a very young sales team. And they were going out and they were getting great meetings, but they were not getting enough conversions. And so I went to a sales meeting, sort of listen in, and we did some practice stuff. And what happened was that they were talking about every single feature and benefit of this software, which at the time was not cheap. It was like 10 grand a month. So, a pretty hefty investment. But what was happening was that most clients were really interested in 3 out of 10. And instead of focusing on the 3 things that were things they would spend money to fix, they would say, that's a really big investment and this is too robust a product for us. If they had only focused on the three things that mattered to those people, they would have gotten a skill like that. And that's exactly what happened when they started doing their homework, figured out, okay, which 2 or 3 things are we going to highlight? Doesn't mean that these other features don't exist, but if they don't care about them, we don't need to set a narrative that says, this is more robust than what you need. What we want to walk out is for them to think, oh my God, if we pay 10 grand a month, they're going to fix these problems for us. Like, that's an easy yes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think whenever you show all the features that you have, you become too complicated and just too confusing and not worth the effort. It doesn't matter about the price. It's more about the effort, that's going to go into it.
If you can get a place that's a 2-bedroom apartment or a 17-bedroom house for the same amount of money, why do you need 17 bedrooms? All I think of is that's more clean, right? It's air conditioning bills are going to be through the roof. Like, who's going to do? Why do I need to do that? I want the place that's the dream place, even if it's a 2-bedroom. And it's the same thing. What does the individual on the other side of the table? What's going to get them to yes? And everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah, I like that. What's going to get them to yes? That's again, it goes back to knowing who you're talking to and what features or morals of the story is going to matter to them. One thing we haven't talked about yet is turbulence. What is turbulence, and why is that the title of your book? And what made you want to go down that path of writing about that?
So the title of the book came more from conversations with my editor, and it's what we realize is a term I use a lot with my clients. That when there's a problem going on, is that creating turbulence for you? Is that it's that sort of unseen but always felt negative thing that's happening within an organization. Sometimes it's like the air under a plane or sort of the eddies under a boat. We don't necessarily notice them, but they make things rock and roll. Things are not as smooth. Things do not go as fast. And oftentimes these kinds of challenges, this lack of taking the time to really focus in on, am I clear? Do people know where they're going? Do they trust me? Am I credible with my team? Am I being really authentic as a leader? All of these things can create real turbulence for a company. It can create drag. It can make decision making very complex and challenging. It may be harder to get fundraising. It may be harder to get your 15 new laptop. Right? What is it that you're looking to get at? Anything that slows down a business in this day and age is peril. So that's really the foundations for the idea of turbulence for the book.
So when I've been a part of this with not just with businesses, but also with projects and digital transformations and other things that are going on. You start out and everybody's motivated and exciting and things seem to be just flying. You seem to be making all kinds of progress. And then you hit that plateau that you talk about and things seem to slow down. What do we need to do to persevere through that or to ride above it? Or what is it that helps us get through something like that?
Yeah. So
I know that's a loaded question.
Right. It's totally like, how long is your podcast? Because it can be a myriad of challenges, but I'm really a firm believer is that, especially in those moments when things are getting fast, when things are getting big, when hiring is crazy, when you're adding features, when you're doubling down on things, and you went from 50 clients to 100 clients, all of those are inflection points that you have to slow down in order to speed up. And it's the last thing we want to do because we feel we don't have time. But again, it goes back to this idea, if you invest time at the beginning, you're going to streamline things later. So how can I, rather than, for example, have a whole chapter about talent, because in rapidly moving organizations, especially tech companies, they just start hiring bodies. And if your best friend, Bob, has done marketing before and he's available, like, let's just get him in and let's just do that. And the challenges that we create for ourselves when we don't take the time to really identify what we really need in terms of talent, going out and looking for them in the right places, and then hiring them and onboarding them properly. We create so many more. It's so expensive in this day and age, especially if it's an engineer, to make a mistake, to make a bad hire, whether it's on their end or on your end. And so if we take the time up front to do that sort of stuff, it makes everything so much easier.
So right now we're in the middle of this. I've heard people say it, the resignations and tsunami, the Great Resignation. There's all kinds of lots of people switching jobs right now. Do you feel like more people are rushing to make decisions and hire when they see a candidate, or are they actually taking their time now more, or what's going on? Because I don't know. Everywhere I look, there's lots of things
People are
happening.
taking more time to accept a job rather
Mm.
than, I think, you can't look up a restaurant and go to their website to look at the menu without a pop-up that says we're hiring.
Yeah.
Up. Are people going to start putting what they call butts in seats? Yeah, but you know what? You don't need butts. You need really smart engineers or really great designers. Or so thinking about a head count, I don't need a disembodied head. I really need someone who's an awesome keeper. So that's the challenge, is that I think the companies that really are taking the time to go out and find, and also the hidden gems. Organizations already have a lot of people within their own organizations who, with some training in certain areas, would be rock stars as leaders or in a slightly different area. And why in the world are they always going to be looking outside instead of developing from the inside? And I think the smart companies are really doing a combination of both. And I think it is. I think the problem is that people are taking more time to accept, but then maybe that'll make for better people who are happier in the right roles later.
Yeah, I've heard lots of different things about more people are reevaluating where they're at. They're looking to, you just went through a pandemic, or maybe you're in the middle of one and you're rethinking is this what's most important to me, this job, or do I need to go somewhere else? Or maybe your company's not remote and you want to go somewhere that is remote because you experienced it now for a year and you don't want to go back to the office. There's lots of reasons. But yeah, I've also seen a lot of people taking more time before they make that decision. I don't know if it's because they have more options or if it's they're just being more thoughtful about the decision.
Well, I think they're trying to clarify for themselves what they
Mm-hmm.
want. And I think that's the one thing that's happened in the pandemic, is that people have slowed down long enough to really ask themselves questions they didn't bother to answer. But I think on the other side, what can be really powerful is if an organization also takes the time to be honest with themselves. If what you really need is a part-time person, then don't go out there and put something as part-time that can lead to full-time when you know it's really not going to be a full-time gig. And then people say, well, I'm not going to put it for part-time because part-time people don't tend to this and that, whatever their excuses are. But then create a narrative in your posting that talks about why you need a really high-end person and how having this as a part-time gig is going to allow you the flexibility to do X or Y. Or, the really frustrating thing is after last summer and now DEI is all the thing, don't just go out and say that that's who you are and what you do as an organization. You got to be really clear and you got to be honest, because people within a week of being in your office, whether you're actually in an office or you're virtual, they're going to know exactly who you are.
Yeah.
Be honest about that yourself so you can be honest and clear with other people. And there are going to be people who are going to buy into that. And that just makes hiring easier.
Do you think it's part of this is you mentioned reevaluating whether you can hire from within, or do you even need that position? That's one of the things that I see a lot of, is that there'll be an opening and it'll take a company several months to fill that opening. And in the meantime, they've reevaluated their processes, they've changed how they do things, and they really don't need that headcount anymore. But it's so hard as a leader or department head to say, I don't need that headcount now, to get rid of your headcount. Is that something that we should do more of, or how can we do more of that without?
I'm not going to tell you that anybody is going to allow their line item to get shrunken down.
Right.
But I do think that what happens, especially as companies grow, is that, let's say somebody started in a role and let's say they grew within the organization over 5 or 6 years. And oftentimes with growing companies, a role will develop out of the skill set that one particular individual had. And then they go out and they try and find that, to replicate that with the unicorn that's just like that person. It may not be that one role can be filled by one person. That person may actually be doing two roles in different jobs. You may need to take that and take two people. so I do think that you do have to take into account, do we need to fill this role as it stands? Or are there skill sets that are now missing on the team that we need to fill in a different way? So it's not about just tasks. Some people get all wound up in which tasks are people doing. But I think you have to think, what is the skill set? What are the qualities that this individual brought to this team, to this development of this product, to this organization that is now missing? And how best do we bring that in? And what I find is if you're growing, chances are that one job is going to need to be filled. So you're not shrinking your headcount at all.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you put that. That makes me feel a little bit better. So how can people find out more about you, the book Turbulence, pick up a copy and learn more about the things that you're doing?
Well, you can go to my website, which is articulatepersuasion.com. Pretty straightforward. There's a link right there to my book. There's a little bit of a book trailer, so you can learn more about the book if this podcast is not enough. But you can also see there some of the other things that I do and the kinds of organizations that I've worked with over the years. I really love to work with companies that are growing fast. And that's not always a startup, although that's always fun and it's really energizing. I've had clients that they're growing really quickly because even though it's a legacy organization that's been around forever, the environment and the market in which they function is changing really fast and they're adapting really fast. And I think that's so exciting because I think that is the opportunity of the place. If we can start getting into better habits and foundational habits around how we as leaders can communicate more effectively for ourselves, for our teams, and for the organization as a whole, again, that brings an awful lot of turbulence. And turbulence is going to come in other ways, right? Pandemics will hit. I can't tell you that I can help you with any of that. But what I can do is make it that when other issues come up, if you've got your team on board, if people are clear where you're going, if you're able to hire the right people and onboard them properly, and if you're showing up as your very best self as leader, then everything else is a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And we'll link that up in the show notes too. And you can also check out her book by going to geekleader.com and clicking on the books from our guest. And I really appreciate having you on. Really enjoy the conversation. And hopefully I'll have you back soon.
I would love to, anytime.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.